Welcome, everyone. My name is Netfa Freeman. I'm the moderator. I'll be your moderator today. Um, I guess I'm just say a little bit about myself. I'm the co-host and co-producer of the radio show Voices with Vision that airs on WPFW, a DC affiliate of the Pacifica station of network of stations. I'm also on the coordinating committee of the Black Alliance for Peace and an organizer in Pan-African Community Action, and really delighted to be doing this, moderating this. I'm also a proud friend of all of the dynamic people that are going to be presenting for us today. We'll brag about the fact that I go way back with them, with the exception of one who I really look forward to building a strong revolutionary relationship with, and building, and doing especially media work, but also just building revolution. We can't go forward with this event without acknowledging and giving tribute to, especially in an event that's really dealing with revolutionary Black media, a recently and sudden loss of comrade and friend Abdus Lukman. We want to honor Brother Abdus and also extend our heartfelt love and warmth and hugs to his partner Jacqueline Lukman. Both of them were really powerful in this in our circles of just doing Black media. They both were the curators of the Lukman Nation, or curators, they did Lukman Nation, and also Abdus was the host of Waters of Healing. And both of those are part of the Black Power Media. And so we want to acknowledge them right off the bat. So we are coming together to talk about radical Black media, its history, where it is now, what role, what we can glean from where it should be going, the landscape, all of that. Some of us refer to it as Black emancipatory journalism. We want to learn about how the revolutionary struggle can be supported in the media, with media, and then share the vision of it and learn from the vision of the people that we have here. I'm going to introduce each person. I'm going to so we just right off the bat, just saying who we have. We have Tierney, Peprah, who is, well, I'm going to get into the bios of each person first. Tierney, Peprah, Garrett Ball, Eugene Puryear, Milton Allimadi, and Margaret Kimberley are presenting with us today. And I think, hold on a second. Oh, so this is gonna be tight. We're gonna have when I say tight is a good thing. It's gonna be a lot of good knowledge being shared and experience being shared. And so we want to get ready for that. I just will say that in terms of Black media and Black radical media in particular, is that it's such a indispensable, it has such an indispensable role in our trying to build revolutionary movements, liberation. I think that's exemplified in the fact that every struggle that we can think of, anything that's really gained any formidable traction against the powers that be, against our enemies, has had at least a media component to it. And also, another telling thing is that when our enemies do something like orchestrate a coup or something like that in some place where they want to undermine a process, revolutionary, or something that just threatens its interest somewhere, one of the things they do to take over is they take over the media outlets. And so it shows the importance of having control of information and being able to form, tell our own stories and our narratives, getting out real concrete analysis about things. And so that's what we're going to try to do today, build on that legacy, learn from what our panelists have to offer in terms of that, and what we're doing now, because everybody here, all the panelists, and even some of you all as attendees are engaged in media work, and really dynamic media work. And so we're going to do that. We're going to get right to that. I'm just going to start by introducing the first person, and I'm going to ask everyone, I'm going to ask you all, the panelists, if you could actually, when I introduce you, start off with sharing with everyone. I'm going to, read your bio and share with everyone about your journey as a person dealing with media, like your, I guess you could say career, but I say your journey, how you entered into the media landscape, include what inspired you to do that. I'm going to start with Margaret Kimberley. And Margaret, and please forgive me for reading, because, but this is how we do. Margaret is along. Margaret Kimberley is a co-founder and editor and senior columnist for Black Agenda Report and the co-host of Black Agenda Report's podcast, The Left Lens. She's the author of the book Presidential: Black America and the Presidents, and a contributor to the anthologies Capitalism on a Ventilator: The Impact of COVID-19 on China and the US, In Defense of Julian Assange, and Killing Trayvons, an anthology of American violence. In addition to Black Agenda Report, Margaret's work has appeared in Counterpunch, Consortium News, Common Dreams. She has appeared on the Beirut-based Al Mayadeen News, the UK Sky News, Iran's Press TV, China's Global Television Network, Germany's Deutsche Welle, and Network RT, Deutsche Welle Network, and then RT, and the public radio stations WBAI, WPFW, KPFA, and KPFK. And she recently joined the board of Consortium News, and in 2020, she was honored with the Sharina Shim Award for Uncompromising Integrity in Journalism. Her work as an activist includes leadership roles on the Black Alliance for Peace and the United National Anti-War Coalition and the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation. Margaret Kimberley, thank you for being with us. Take it away.
Oh, thank you, Netfa. Thank you so much. And I also want to add my condolences to Jacqueline Luqman in the loss of Abdus. It's a huge shock to us all. And I'm happy to say that I worked with them, interviewed them both, and in addition to their contributions, they're just lovely people. So I wanted to mention that before I start talking about myself. I started, it's a very funny story. I began writing for, now it was called Black Commentator, which still exists. And I had wanted to write a letter, and I sent this email to Glenn Ford. I have an opinion about that. And he said, okay. And anyway, it soon began, and I said, I want to write more. And that's why it's important to mentor. That's the first thing I want to say, to try to tell people yes when you can. And for a variety of reasons, Glenn, the late Bruce Dixon, and I, Letitia Still, started Black Agenda Report in 2006. And I wrote a column every week, which is hard to do. It's hard to commit to doing something like that all the time, which Glenn warned me about at first. He said, you don't have to write something every week. And I said, no, I will do that. But in saying yes to that, there's nothing like doing the work, like writing all the time, reading all the time. I tell anybody, read a lot, write a lot. And I think it's important to stretch and say yes to things that you're not sure you can do. Yes, I can write a column every week. Yes, I can be on this panel. I remember the first panel I was on, and there was this, blurry recording. I was terrible. I didn't know what I was doing. I was reading from note cards. But as a result of saying yes a lot, as a result of exposing myself to people like you, I learned a lot. I educated myself. We're all miseducated in this country. I think it's very hard not to be. But by always doing the work, always taking every opportunity to learn something new, taking every opportunity to be on a panel, to be interviewed, And I was looking at my bio and I said, gee, that's kind of long, but I suppose I did want to include all of it, just to tell people what can happen when you do say yes. And it's important to be in an organization. So being in the United National Anti-War Coalition first, and then Black Alliance for Peace from the very beginning, gave me additional opportunities to speak, to learn from other people. So I would say you cannot miss by doing those things. And it's important to read everything that you can, even to read sources that you don't trust, because then you know what's being said. You know what your enemies are saying, but you have to know that they are. And I have to say, I did not always have the politics I have now. I grew up as a, regular Democrat, reading the New York Times every day, like it was, the Bible or something. And having done that, and also having educated myself and realizing that there's always something new for me to know, now I know where to look for information. And we're inundated with information. How much of it is good? Not much. But, and now with media consolidation, the growth of corporate media, even these tools we have in these social media platforms, which we all utilize, which are so helpful to us, it's a double-edged sword. They're all capitalists, they're all corporate. They don't let everybody speak. You'll find out if you say the wrong thing when you're deplatformed. They deplatformed a former president, didn't they? But if I had to sum up what I just said, it's to work. If it's writing, if it's speaking, if it's being interviewed, if it's interviewing, take every opportunity to learn something new, and to realize that you don't know as much as you should in order to be effective as a Black person and in the media, because we're lied to so much. I don't know how much, if anybody else has had the experience of realizing how badly educated you are and how little you really know. And being angry about that. It still happens to me, but that's my journey in the media and how I came to be here tonight.
Thank you, Margaret. So let's move right to the next person, Eugene Puryear. I'm going to read a bit about Eugene Puryear. I'm going to say one thing though about brother. We've known, like, I said, known all these people. Eugene is like, this is a brother. I think he's got a good bit of younger years behind me, but he dispels ageism for me, because I learned so much from him as a person that's considerably younger than me. But let me get right to the bio, so I'm gonna run out of time. Eugene Puryear is a longtime journalist and community organizer, currently based in New York City. As a high school student in Charlottesville, Virginia, Eugene organized a walkout when the war in Iraq began in 2003, and helped to organize a number of the large-scale demonstrations that took place against the community, against the continuing U.S. war and occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. He was a key leader in the struggle for the Free Jena 6 in 2007. I forget how many, I haven't heard that in a while. Was a founder of the anti-gentrification group Justice First, as well as the Jobs Not Jails Coalition, DC Ferguson Movement, and Stop Police Terror Project DC. Eugene is the author of the book Shackled and Chained, Mass Incarceration in Capitalist America, and worked for the past 4 years as the lead host of By Any Means Necessary, a public affairs radio program in Washington, DC. Currently, he is the lead host of the News on Breakthrough News, a social justice media project. Eugene, thank you for joining us and lending us your knowledge.
Well, first and foremost, I just have to thank the Black Alliance for Peace for giving me the opportunity to be here and to speak, and for, quite frankly, being at the tip of the spear of the anti-imperialist struggle here in the US and also all around the world. So much appreciation, very happy to be here. And I think fantastic turnout, just looking at the number of individuals who are participating. So shout out to everybody who brought themselves here to be a part of this event here tonight. And I think we will all continue to join in this, but just to reiterate, the condolences to Jackie Lukman and family for the loss of Abdus Shahid Lukman. It's hard to even know what to say. Just a terrible loss. I mean, you think about Revolutionary Corps, Vanguard forces, Jackie and Abdus is exactly who comes to my mind. So condolences there. You know, you ask, how did the journey, it's good you said journey, not career, because most of it is by accident, to be honest with you. You know, as someone who had done a lot of organizing work and been in the media, it just started to kind of trend in my favor, where people started offering me paid opportunities to speak for a living. And ultimately, from my point of view, what really brought me into this work was the importance of the battle of ideas. That at the end of the day, even though I had no quote unquote media training, I had never been in the media other than being interviewed, it felt like a very rare opportunity. I mean, first, as you know, Netfa was there on WPFW. Then I was able to go to Radio Sputnik and do By Any Means Necessary for a few years, which of course is still ongoing with Jackie Lukman and Sean Blackman every day, Monday through Friday, from 2 to 4. And, you know, it just felt like an opportunity, a rare opportunity to be able to engage a broad audience, in many ways, people who you had no idea who you would be reaching, who you could be touching, but at least potentially millions of people who could hear you at any time with not only what I had to say, but also to be able to bring on people on this call, people on this panel, people in this in the chat. I see in the chat people who are here in this meeting who have so much to offer, both in terms of their own analysis and the ability to link that analysis to the need to organize and the belief that people can actually change their circumstances when they come together collectively and struggle. And since that is a message that obviously is never going to be brought by the mainstream corporate information, it just felt like, okay, cool. Here it is. We have a platform. We have millions of people. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to get on there and start doing it and hope for the best, really, in terms of what we've done. And I think it's honestly turned out much better than I thought. And I've had the opportunity to share with so many colleagues. And so when we had the opportunity to build Breakthrough News, you know, it was sort of fly by the seat of our pants, came together in about 3 months of us just, you know, pulling dollars from here and there and recruiting people, getting them to quit their jobs, come work with us, and building a small team to be able to launch something that was really much more in our control, I should say, those of us who were doing it, in terms of the politics, in terms of what we want to do, in terms of who we wanted to bring in. Is obviously video, not audio. So it was a new opportunity, but the same basic message and the same basic mission that if we want revolution, if we want to challenge imperialism, it's not just going to fall from the sky. We have to push for it. We have to organize for it. And we have to recognize and that everyone comes from somewhere. Not everyone is born with, you know, the right politics. Some of us are lucky enough to be born into families where that's, you know, an everyday conversation. I was lucky enough to be, you know, 10 years old and hearing about how the Palestinian struggle was the most you know, just struggle that there was, and Zionism was the enemy and we must crush it. But that is much more rare than anything else. And so to give people the information they need to go out every day and to fight the battle of ideas, to talk to their friends, their neighbors, their acquaintances, and to continue to win forces into the organizations that are really going to help us do the work. And that's a big piece and a big philosophy behind what we've tried to do in Breakthrough News, is to always make sure that we're doing everything we can to highlight organizations, individuals who are tied to organizations, the importance of organization, so that folks can, if they take nothing else away from what we are doing, they can take away that there is a movement that's out there. There are people who are organizing and pushing and fighting back. So it's been quite a journey, to be honest with you. And I've been extraordinarily lucky to be able to do it, to have the opportunity to do things like go to Haiti this year and report from there. I never imagined that would be possible. And I think that for everybody, I really would echo Margaret. I mean, I think we're so often put in a context, especially as Black people, about what we can do, what we can't do, what we are supposed to be speaking on and what we aren't supposed to be speaking on. And I think not getting trapped in those molds and not allowing ourselves to be shackled by those chains is critically important. And doing this media work, if anything, has really reaffirmed that to me. And the ability, whatever your formal level of education, to engage in this work is very high. I always say when people say, oh, I'm nervous about going on the radio, and I'll close here, you know, if you call your friend up to complain about something or to talk about politics or whatever, you're not nervous, you're just saying what you think, saying what you feel. And I think that's a lot of what we do, and it's possible for everyone to do it. And I really appreciate everyone who's given me an opportunity, and I'm excited to be here and to keep talking about all the critical and important issues connected to the battle of ideas.
Thank you, Eugene. So let's moving right along. I want to go next with Tierney Peprah, host of the African Esquire TV channel on YouTube. She serves as the steering committee chair for the organization We Charge Colonialism and the president of the Decolonization of Human Rights Clinic initiative under the National Conference of Black Lawyers. She's author of the book Fostering Fake Identity, the Child Welfare System's Design of the Social Control of the Black Family. Tierney, your journey and what inspired you along the way?
Thank you so much for having me. And first of all, I'm very honored to be on a panel with people who have been struggling for a long time. It's funny, I remember doing a report in college on Obama, and my whole idea was that this guy is the white man's puppet, and I couldn't find any sources of information to prove my point. And I found this website, Black Agenda Report, and it gave me so much of what I actually use. So thank you for getting me an A on that paper. So I'm really not, you know, it's funny, I just recently started being comfortable with the idea of the label of media. That definitely was not my original intent in making a YouTube channel. So I came from like an ideology and a background I would say was actually conservative as a child. And the more I questioned, the more I observed the conditions of African people, the more I knew something was wrong. And so I started exploring and questioning more. And I think questioning, along with, you know, reading and researching, questioning is always good, because when you know something isn't right, a lot of times you're right, you know, it's in your gut. And I knew in my gut that this system was not something that was right. And so when I started going on that ideological trip, I tried to find ways to organize with people. I think probably in my background, you know, coming from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not a lot of organizations that are reflective of a radical politics. I just wanted an outlet, especially at a time when I was in law school, and law school in itself, you're so carried away with studying and stuff. So you really you're not exposed to radical people, and lawyers tend not to be radical, really. So that was a big barrier for me trying to have an outlet. And so really YouTube kind of just played the role for that. I noticed that there wasn't a lot of Pan-Africanist voices on YouTube at that time, at least none that were speaking directly against, you know, things like capitalism. And so I just started putting out videos, and that was kind of my way of filling that void that I had of not having a lot of outlets as far as organizations that were radical. And I think just with consistency, honestly, making it like my not an option, you know, I'm going to post a video or this many days or whatnot. And I'm not, as I got more into it, not just posting videos for clickbait, but posting videos because I sincerely feel like there's something that someone is not hearing about what's going on. I think that consistency has just allowed me to start reaching more people. And so honestly, it's really an honor to be considered media, because, you know, my intention was more so just trying to engage inside of the issues of African people. But I'm comfortable with that label because I understand more now that media really is one of the only weapons, you know, for a lot of people, particularly inside of places where you don't have exposure to things that are going on as far as radical politics. You will think that there is nothing going on. I mean, I remember one time I'm like, dang, Black people, we don't have anything, like, you know, we're just out here struggling and we're just fighting the same fights and there's no real outlets for us. And then you start watching and seeing, no, there's actually a lot of organizations that exist. I mean, a lot of people say we're certainly not organized the way we need to be, but there are a lot of organizations and there are a lot of campaigns. And so that gave me the opportunity really to see, you know, on YouTube or on podcasts, you know, there's a lot of people who get silenced from the media and no one will ever know that they exist, but for the fact that we have this thing called the internet. And so I think that's the tool that we have in our hands. And more and more, I think this is something that we're comfortable with, because I don't personally know of many organizers, activists who are not actively engaging at this point with the internet. And so clearly, you know, there's an agenda to silence information. And so that puts it on us to make sure that we are preoccupied with finding ways to get the word out about issues that are happening for our people and our communities.
All right, thank you. So just lifting up a couple of things when you mentioned getting comfortable. We said media, but journalists. When I first started hearing, you know, consider myself a journalist, or hearing someone else consider me a journalist, kind of caught me off guard because I wasn't thinking. Didn't come, you know, like. So anyway, and then the other, yeah. So that, and then the other. Well, let me get to these bios because I forgot my other point. Jared Ball, AKA to me, JB, is a father and husband. After that, he is a professor of communications and Africana Studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, and is founder, curator of iMixWhatiLike.org, a multimedia hub of emancipatory journalism and revolutionary beat reporting. JB is also author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, also the co-editor, along with Todd Stephen Burrows, of sorry, hold on a second. Of A Lie of Reinvention, Correcting Manning Marable's Malcolm X, and a longtime comrade of Netfa. I just stuck that in there. But JB, go ahead and take it away. I've learned a lot from this brother about communications and journalism and all that, and the role that it plays. Like, anyway, are you there?
I'm here. Am I not? Oh. Okay. Peace, everybody. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. And yeah, actually, the only thing I asked Netfa to add to my short bio was that I am a comrade of Netfa for a long time. That's really all I would. That's the calling card for the people's struggle. I know Netfa. No, it's a pleasure to be here and to be with this particular gathering of those on the panel, those in the audience, and of course, in addition to thanking Black Alliance for Peace, do also want to extend again my condolences to Jackie and her entire family, and to Brother Abdus as well, and may he rest in power. My own journey to this, in many ways, begins with just trying to become a revolutionary after my sentence in the United States military. And coming out of the military, not really knowing where to go, and, you know, pre-internet, and not really, you know, as easily able to find where to meet the struggle, started looking for alternative media. And as a full-time pizza deliverer, I started listening to a lot more rap music mixtapes that would mostly come down from New York City, and then to PA tapes from the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful pocket created in my original native homeland of Washington, D.C. And then also, because I was in Howard County at the time, and had been put in touch with what is still today my favorite bookstore, Everyone's Place in Baltimore, listening to lecture tapes So in the car delivering pizza all day and night, I created this alternative media environment that was very different from radio and television. And then as I started to sort of, again, meet the struggle and enter the struggle and realize and learn from the struggle itself that media are essential, the production of journalism from within the movement is essential. I started to become more interested in that. And then I have to give credit also later on to Dr. Todd Stephen Burroughs, because after an initial plan to go elsewhere academically, he brought me into the PhD program at the University of Maryland after a wonderful 2-year period studying under Dr. James Turner at the Afrikan Studies and Research Center. Which made, by the way, the PhD at the University of Maryland in journalism, at least, very easy intellectually, but difficult politically, which is itself another ongoing struggle that unfortunately too many of us experience in the academy. But where, by the way, I first was introduced to Brother Allimadi's work. And his brilliant criticism at the time of the heart of whiteness of the New York Times and its approach to African people, which was then for my dissertation and since has been a core component to my own study. And then it's also funny that my sort of journalistic origin story becomes somewhat very similar to what Margaret described. I had been doing mixtapes and trying to create journalistic mixtapes as part of a grassroots organization in DC. And one day happened to be listening to commercial radio and heard this complete nonsense from Michael Eric Dyson. And I wrote an email to Glenn Ford and was like, I don't know if you know about this commentary, this situation here, but this is a problem. And Glenn basically just said, well, that sounds good. And why don't you just write that into something? And then that slowly became my own involvement with Black Commentator and then Black Agenda Report. And again, similar to what Margaret was saying, trying to do, weekly radio commentaries and trying to, copy Glenn is not easy. And I failed miserably, at least in the quality, but learned a lot about, how to make, regular routine production with that kind of politic and to shorten it into 3 to 4 minutes or so. And I also have to credit Damu Smith, the late great Damu Smith of Black Voices for Peace, who brought me into WPFW initially in the early 2000s, and as did Netfa. Will have to fill in the sister's last name. I could never get it right, but Reem, who Netfa worked with Voices with Vision. I don't want to butcher her name, and I forgive me for that. Yeah, thank you. But I tried to start mimicking all of them and trying to do radio like them and bring what I learned, about emancipatory journalism and the idea that an anti-colonial struggle needs journalism produced by people engaged in organized efforts. So I was just trying to bring that to the work I did in trying to, follow their footsteps at WPFW. And then I'll just wrap here by saying what we're trying to do with Black Power Media is recreate and try to collectively build a new public sphere, which is what I think Black radical media is and has always tried to do, to say we understand that there's a dominant narrative being imposed on us. That's what imperialism and capitalism do. But we have to create, if for lack of a better way of putting it, a cocoon around ourselves and within which we can develop a media and produce a journalism and a media that encourage radical organization, help it grow, help recruit to it, and help it become eventually what makes the dominant narrative we suffer currently moot. So that's why I'm very happy to be trying to do what I'm doing with many of the people who are gathered here. And again, it's an honor. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jared. So next, we're going to, just before we get into this deep conversation, we're going to hear from my brother Milton Allimadi. Sometimes I ask people, when did we meet? If you remember when we met. I remember, but I like to mess with them and see if they remember. So Milton Allimadi publishes BlackStarNews.com and host of Black Star News Show on WBAI 99.3 FM radio and WBAI.org, Tuesday, 3 p.m. He's also an adjunct professor of African history at John Jay College and host of the podcast African History Club on Patreon. He's the author of the newly published book, Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. And now it's Kendall Hunt Publishing, and then now available on Amazon. And I don't know why, brother, you didn't put How White Writers Created the Racist Image of Africa, but that you're also the author of that. Or is that the new edition and you retitled it? I don't know. But we go way back. I'm my brother Mungazi and whatnot. I don't know if you remember that. We were speaking at some college somewhere. This goes like 2003 or whatever it was. But anyway, let me let you take it away. You're muted though.
Am I good now? Yes, time flies, comrade. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to all the comrades on. And I also want to start by extending condolences, of course, to the Lookman family. I just heard about it as you posted it, as you announced it tonight. So I'm deeply saddened because you had introduced us recently, and I started a monthly, once a month appearance on their program, the first Friday of each month. We had done, I think, 3, and obviously we were now preparing for the 4th one. So this is very saddening to me personally. And I wish the best. I wish that, the Creator sustain her and the family. This event, I want to thank Black Alliance for hosting this. I hope this becomes a regular event, because this is one way we can really discuss issues that corporate media either don't touch or completely distort. This is a potentially very empowering platform that we can launch. So I hope you give that consideration. And I think all of us that are on today, we should agree that we don't even have to discuss. We should take it for granted that we should have content sharing so that we can share content across our different platforms. And I make this announcement. Anyone is welcome to use any content on blackstarnews.com, any content on my podcast, African History Club. Maybe the only content that, since I have another publisher now for the new book, that one I don't have much control over, but anything else, is fair game. And I hope we all consider reciprocating this kind of arrangement. Now, in terms of my own journey in journalism, I think it started when I was around maybe 12 in Tanzania. I'm originally from Uganda, but my family lived in Tanzania for many years. In fact, I went to high school in Tanzania. My family was exiled from the Idi Amin regime that was imposed on Uganda by Israel and Britain in 1971. So in Tanzania, when I was around maybe 11 or 12, my father used to send me, my late father, to buy him the newspaper. It was called the Daily News in Tanzania. They had an English paper. And then I forget the name of the Kiswahili language newspaper now in Tanzania. So the early edition used to come out around 11 p.m. And I would go to near the printing plant where the salespeople would be selling it, and I would buy a copy. I would sit under a street light, and I would read through the papers before I took it, to my father. And he used to always ask me, wait, I thought the thing came out at 11. Why are you always coming home around midnight? And I said, no, I think it does come out at midnight, actually. So that was how I developed my understanding for the world. I read about what was going on in South Africa. I read about what was going on in Vietnam. I became very critical of US over the involvement in Vietnam, because Tanzania would always have the photos of the bombings and the victims, the destroyed homes, the bodies, the burned children. So that's the kind of environment that I grew up in Tanzania. But to be honest, I wouldn't say journalism was my first preference at the age of 12. At the age of 12, 13, when I started writing, I wanted to write an African version of James Bond. And I actually did, but I don't know whatever happened to that manuscript. I imagine it wasn't that good anyway. And then my next dream was to make films. I wanted to be a film director. So then when I had an opportunity to come to the US to go to college, and my father was going to pay for it, and he said, no, film is not a serious profession. So if you select a serious profession, I'll pay for it. So I selected economics. But through the years, I found myself not being able to resist participating in journalism. I would write letters to the editor almost every day. I started doing this actually when I was in Tanzania. I hated the way Africans were represented because I would go to the US, I think it was called the US Information Service, and I would read all the publications from the United States. Newsweek, Time, the New York Times, of course, and Time Magazine. I would read publications. They also had, Jet, Ebony, all those publications. So I really detested the way Africans are always portrayed, tribal. It bothered me for a long time. So anytime Africa was misrepresented in any news story, or even Haiti, the way Haiti was treated, I would write a letter to the editor. I'm now in the United States. And some would get published, many would not be published. And then at some point, my friend said, listen, why don't you go to journalism school, go back to school? And rather than be shouting from outside the walls, become a participant. So actually it did. I went back to school to study journalism. I went to the graduate program at Columbia. And when I was there, I also did something that actually ended up being the Hearts of Darkness, how white writers created the racist image of Africa. And through the years, I've now expanded it and broadened it. And the new version is Manufacturing Hate, how Africa was demonized in Western media. And the publisher was more comfortable with that title. So I said, so long as the content is 100% the same, which is in fact the case, nothing else was touched. The critique of the New York Times was touched. The letters quoting their ugly language, the ugly racism toward Africa was not touched. So I said, okay, if that's the only thing you're asking for, the title, I said, fine, let's go with that, because I always liked the title Manufacturing Consent anyway. So there was a little play on that. So I said, fine, I'll settle for that. So after Columbia, I worked for a few years as a freelance reporter for the New York Times covering Metro News, because ultimately I had this crazy idea that at some point I could become a staffer and influence some change from within the New York Times. But then I encountered a publication called the City Sun, which was a Black-owned weekly paper published by the late Andy Cooper. And I said, this is journalism. It was well edited. The editor's name was Utrice Lead. It was just one of the best newspapers I had ever read. And so I called the publisher. I said, listen, I want to work for you. You're really doing the kind of journalism I want to do. You're for the people, of the people, from the people. So he said, how much are you making at the Times? I told him, and he said, no, I can't pay you. I said, listen, sometimes it's not just really all about the money. And he was honest. I mean, he was honest about it. He said, I can only give you 25% of what you're making, but you'll have freedom to write about anything that you want. And that to me was just like remarkable and amazing, because at the Times, the only thing I was allowed to report and write on was crime stories. Back in those days, a lot of shooting, a lot of stabbing, a lot of drug-related violence. And that's the only thing they had me covering. And whenever I pitched, I said, listen, there are things that go on in these communities as well. let me write about those. And they would say, yeah, but they would make sure I'm always being sent on the crime assignments. I'll never have time to do those other assignments. So when Andy Cooper said, yes, you can write about anything you want, that was it. The next week I was working at the City Sun. And that was, I experienced some of the best joyous journalism at the City Sun, when people used to actually come to the office to thank us, to thank me personally for how a particular story changed the trajectory of a case they were facing in court, or some issue they were dealing with a city government institution. The article actually changed the tide. And that's why I said this is powerful. And then the publisher was a bit elder, Cooper. So when he started having a series of strokes, unfortunately, and this is not just a problem that the City Sun faces, this is most of our African institutions. And primarily it's because we don't, have the resources to have like a hierarchy and a good system so that the institution can outlive the founder. So when he went down, the City Sun also went down. And I said, you know what, I'm not going back to covering crime at the New York Times. So I sat down, I wrote a business plan. I started sending it out to people I knew had money, people like Michael Jordan, people like Magic, people like Oprah, people like Bill Cosby. I sent it to about maybe 30 people, a business plan. And eventually, after 3 or 4 months, I actually got a couple of checks signed by Camille Cosby. And that's how I started the Black Star News. And Black Star News is trying to make that connection that we need to have between Africans on the continent and diaspora Africans. And that's what we continue to do. And I just want to give one example of how significant media like this can be. When the NATO War was launched on Libya, we wrote more than 100 editorials attacking the war. And I believe in our case, our kind of journalism cannot be intellectual journalism alone. We have to become activists and involve people in mass activism. So one editorial in particular, when they started killing Libyans who looked like us in the city of Tawaga, and the New York Times was not touching the story, at least I give credit to the Wall Street Journal, they wrote about it. So they broke that conspiracy of silence. And I wrote an editorial and I gave out the number for the editor and the publisher in the New York Times. I gave up the number for the Urban League, for the NAACP, and the names of the directors and all that. And I urge people, call this number and ask them point blanket, why are you not writing about this ethnic targeting, killing of African Libyans? And the very next day after we posted this editorial, we could not access our website. For 3 days, we could not access our website. And then one night, 4 a.m., I just woke up and I called our host is Network Solutions. And they told me the same thing they'd been telling me for 3 days. Oh, there's a technical issue we're trying to fix. I said, I don't believe you. I don't believe of the thousands of websites you host, all of them are having the same technical issue and cannot access the website. I started asking for the names of people I was speaking with, took down the names. I went back to bed. I got up in the morning, the website was back up. And then now I'm very curious, what is going on? I went on the website and that last editorial that we had posted had been deleted. Imagine. And we talk about, so-called freedom of speech and freedom of journalism and all that nonsense, So the website was hijacked for 3 days, and then they deleted an editorial that had already been published. But thankfully, many other outlets has picked up that same editorial. So we wrote another editorial explaining how the shadow government, not even shadow in this case, had hijacked our website, deleted this editorial, and then we borrowed the same editorial from another website that had published it, and we published it. So I think I'll stop on that point for now.
Yeah, that was good stuff, though. So we're going to get into a conversation, and then we're just a short conversation, and then we're going to bring in the audience to be able to ask questions. I'm not sure whether we're going to. I guess we'll use if it's probably easiest when we do the question and answer. If people use the question and answer part and not the chat, because it'll get lost in the chat. It's very active. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A, that thing, and hit it there. Only put questions there, please. Don't put anything else, because then we'll start messing up the questions. But we're gonna have a few of my own first to get us started with a conversation. And I'm kind of, I throw it out to everyone. I guess the first question, if we can kind of start, I think, with considering some historical context. And then as we opened, I mentioned how communications in general and media is an important part of the liberation struggle, indispensable, and how people know it. But we also have a history of this. I'm kind of throwing out a question. I'm assuming maybe that Jared might be best equipped for this, but I think a lot of people will know about the history. When you think about things like the Spark in Ghana, or the Negro World, Marcus Garvey, or Radio Free Dixie was that with NAACP in North Carolina. What kind of, if you can think of, any of you can think of 1 or 3 salient lessons from that kind of history. You don't have to talk about anything specific, but anything we know that we can glean from how those things manifest itself, how much we should, what even mistakes too, because sometimes we can learn from mistakes. Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Are you really asking me first?
You can, well, yeah, if we can have a first person.
To the extent I understand the question, I think that you mentioned some important examples. I mentioned this the other day that I think it's interesting that it's a horrible recording and very difficult to hear, but it's still kind of worth it to hear the FBI attempts to monitor the Radio Free Dixie communique from Robert and Mabel Williams, and in their fear of its impact on so-called Negroes in the South, given its encouragement to rebel. And related to that is just something I always think about, and I'll just sort of leave it with this one example related to Robert and Mabel Williams, that in the I think PBS sanctioned version of Mabel and Robert's story, this example is not included. But if you hear the Freedom Archives audio documentary on Robert and Mabel, this example is, which is that the newsletter that Robert and Mabel Williams produced which itself, wasn't that itself also called Blacklash? Yeah, I think that was Blacklash. Which encouraged, Black people to understand the colonial relationship that we have to the United States, to understand the relationship to the internationalist struggle, and to also understand the importance of armed self-defense. That in the Freedom Archives version, a story is told that where one of Ho Chi Minh's generals, upon meeting Robert Williams, told him that it was one of those, an edition of one of those newsletters that encouraged Ho Chi Minh to develop the Tet Offensive and to change the tide of the Vietnam War, taking engaging in urban guerrilla warfare. And I've always thought of that because there's a lot of the work that we are encouraged to do as part of media producers engaged in this kind of political struggle. We're always encouraged to see that our numbers and our views and our reach isn't what it is in other commercial and more popular spaces. But to me, that's never the real point. The point is it's not to reach necessarily a quote unquote mass audience. It's to target those engaged in organized political struggle with the messages they need to improve their work and the impact of their work. So to me, that sort of example says everything, that it was so important that the state monitor these broadcasts, these little shortwave radio broadcasts from Cuba into the southern part of the United States. And yet those broadcasts understandably could have internationally the kind of impact that this state would be terrified of. So, yeah.
Anybody else want to say anything to that?
Yes, I don't want to really add much beyond what the brother already said. I think that covers a lot of ground. But I just want to give a point that shows the impact and power of journalism. If you go to a website called history.state.gov, I think it's like a treasure trove of documents. And, sometimes when I have some free time, downtime, I go and I just do searches, because you can search anything there. So you can search Ghana and US imperialism, for example, and memos would come up. You can search US collusion with apartheid regime. Documents would come up. And if any one of the comrades on the panel was not familiar with that website, I really urge you to, you may find yourself spending just too much time there once you start reading some of those documents. So there was one in particular where the US ambassador to Ghana was instructed by the White House to meet with Nkrumah and make him know how dissatisfied the US was with a couple of the editorials that had appeared in the newspaper in Ghana, condemning US imperialism in Africa and US efforts to undermine the government of Ghana. And then the ambassador was instructed to tell Nkrumah that this would have severe impact on US Ghanaian relations. So that's just an example of how seriously they take. Sometimes, imagine that, the people in Ghana, I'm sure, knew it had impact, but it's interesting for us who are now, decades later studying this topic to see how serious it really had impact on the US administration.
Did anybody else want to deal with that? Okay, I'll assume not and just go on.
Netfa, I'm sorry, I couldn't get off mute.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I apologize, just very, very briefly. To me, when you talk about lessons, I think one important one, maybe it goes without saying here, but I think it deserves to be said regardless. Poor, working, and oppressed people are hungry for knowledge. And that one of our main struggles is against the attempts of the ruling class to infantilize people, in many different ways. But I think it's got to be one of the biggest myths that somehow there isn't a strong, hungry struggle for knowledge. And one story I always think about, it's an older story, but I think it's relevant, about the Negro World, which you mentioned, and it comes from Jomo Kenyatta. And it's in, if you want to get the source from it, to the Ties That Bind by Bernard Magubane. And he talks about how people the dock workers would get the Negro World, they would then distribute it to individuals who were runners, basically, who would then run from the port, like this is all on foot, into the various villages and so on and so forth, and then read it, and then just go to the next one. And sometimes they would stop and someone else would go on. But it was like a chain of information that would run from the port into the deepest interiors of Kenya with the news, the whole newspaper of the Negro World. And I always thought that was so amazing. Not only that it reached there, but just the chain of individuals moving by foot and by word of mouth to bring information from all around the world to people who were basically isolated, or at least previously isolated from all of these other people, and bringing them to this worldwide maelstrom. And I think it's worth noting too that the biggest distribution of the Negro World in the United States was in the South. And I think for similar reasons, the ability to connect and to link up to people. But I just think that's so important, because so often I feel it's always said, well, you can't give people concepts. People don't want to hear all that. They don't want to know all that. And never in my life have I ever met anyone who's really trying to struggle, who isn't trying to get as much knowledge as possible. In the seminal autobiography by Hosea Hudson, Black Worker in the Deep South, and I'll close here, he has an amazing passage where he talks about how he went to a a Communist Party school in New York and just learned a lot of different things about what was going on in the world. And he talks about when he came back and he was getting his hair cut, and he just started talking about what he had learned about what was going on in the world situation, and how the whole barbershop just came into a hush. No one was saying one word, and they just sat there and listened to him for an hour because they were just so hungry to hear what he had learned about what was happening all over the world, so they could take it and I'm sure apply it in their own ways. And I just think that's such an important but easily lost point. Maybe not lost on many of the people who are here today, but I think it's something we always have to struggle against, this idea that somehow people can only accept something that's dumbed down, and that people don't have the ability to grasp and use information as a weapon, really, in the course of their broader struggle.
Yeah. Shall I move on to the next? Yeah, let's move. So, if I don't know if Tierney, who else, or Margaret, if you wanted to chime in on that. Okay.
Go to the next question. Thank you.
Okay. So now this one is, I mean, I don't know how much y'all paid attention to the news today, or I know we've been told about the George Floyd Act and police reform, because we liberated from the Trump white supremacy now, and then today, the feds just signed Juneteenth as a federal holiday, and so there's to me a lot of these things right now we're seeing we've always seen a lot of us refer to as the fourth branch of the government, the convolutions of corporate media and the government, but now with big tech getting in on it, and all of us, we sort of almost depend on social media and that kind of stuff, and in a way, not depend on it, but I don't know, we might depend on it. So how do we, what do we do to make sure what can we do, because we might not be doing anything, it's from our side, those who are media makers, and then those who are consuming media, to make sure what we're doing and we're not just talking to the choir, and that we are, and maybe what Jared said already answered this, and that we're not just with the algorithms, getting our, as broad a reach out as possible. Does that make sense? Or what directions should media be going in and taking into consideration the evolution and the trajectory of media given social media and big tech?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
First of all, I wrote about Juneteenth this week in Black Agenda Report. It's called How Not to Celebrate Juneteenth. It's very problematic that this is a holiday. It's not clear to me what we're supposed to be celebrating. Right. Are we celebrating the end of the Civil War? Are we celebrating, do people know the story of the Civil War, not the terrible narratives we've been given about Lincoln? This passive story of Black people in Texas didn't know they were free till this guy showed up, which is nonsense. Black people knew everything that white people knew. And the Civil War it did end slavery. That's not because it's what Lincoln wanted. So this is very, very, very problematic to me. And to see these members of the Black Caucus standing behind Biden, signing this law, which takes our history away from us, takes a people's holiday away from us, so he can cover for himself because he lied about the things that Black people wanted him to do. He could erase a huge portion of student loan debt, which would be a huge thing for Black people. But instead, we see this dubious, and I don't mean our story is dubious, but the way it's told is dubious. And the fact that this, I know I'm off topic, but I'm sorry, I'm venting now. That this vote was unanimous in the Senate. That means Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and all these people we're supposed to hate were in favor of making Juneteenth the holiday, which tells you how much BS it was. And this is why we need to just keep doing what we're doing. Tells you why our work is so important, because we do get through to people, and people are hungry, as Eugene just said. That's why they inundate us with crap, because they know people want to know more. So we have to do what we can to get through these. We have these tools which are at the same time dangerous. Milton's story about the New York Times, cutting him off is instructive, but 10 years later now, I just found out that Twitter often will start taking people away who followed you if you're a leftist.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
but can you get your story told? Can you express yourself without using Twitter? I wouldn't recommend it. So that's the challenge for us, is to be knowledgeable about all of these things and to tell the story that doesn't get told, and not to be tied down to what we call at Black Agenda Report, the Black misleadership class, grinning with Biden over nonsense and saying absolutely nothing about the things they actually have the power to push him on. So I kind of forgot your question because you mentioned the Juneteenth holiday. Anyway, I will stop and let someone else speak.
No, Margaret, you dealt with a good part of it, the front end of the question. And so I'll touch a little bit on the other part of the question, which was how to amplify what we produce. But I agree totally with what Margaret said in terms of this total disdain of communicating by symbolism. You throw some crumbs on the table, and that's supposed to appease the masses. It's preposterous and very insulting on many, many levels. Now, in terms of how to elevate the content that we produce, people are really hungry for content that are informative. Because if you switch on MSNBC or CNN, if you switch on and then you switch off, and then let's say you switch on around the same time the next day, then it would be as if you never even switched the TV off. The conversation would be the same inane repetition of the same thing, again and again and again and again. Oh, did you hear what this congressman said today about January 6th? So that's going to consume the conversation, and that becomes the news for the entire day. They call different talking heads to comment on the same issue. And I am confident that most people are a lot smarter than that. And if they can get information that can make them think and connect the dots, I think that would be welcome. And that's why I said from the very beginning, I hope we have more of this type of discussion, where we can select a couple of very topical issues and break it down from our perspective. If we were talking this conversation right now in 2010, 2011, we would be discussing the NATO war on Libya. How is it that NATO can conduct a war on Africa and tell an African president, Zuma, who was the president of South Africa at the time, who wanted to go and negotiate with Gaddafi, that you needed to get permission from NATO in order to fly from one African country, South Africa, to Libya, because they had imposed a no-fly zone, meaning theoretically, Zuma's plane could have been shot down had it not been cleared by NATO. These are the kind of conversations we would be having, and break that conspiracy of silence by corporate media. We would be having the conversation about the killing of Africans in the city of Tawaga, Libyans that look like us. And I know why, of course, they suppressed that, because it would be inconvenient truth. The Wall Street Journal reported that on some of the buildings, after the ethnic cleansing and people have been driven away, they wrote the words brigade, referring to themselves, that unit that conducted the atrocities, the brigade to eliminate slaves. That's what they were writing. So obviously, if this story became popularly known, people would be saying, why is it that under a Black president, the US is actually financing, arming, aiding, and abetting the targeted killing of Libyans that look like us? It would have undermined the whole NATO campaign. against Libya. So I'm saying all this to say that there are many other topical issues that are going on right now. Chad, for example, how is it that a president of France can go to Chad where the civil society is protesting, trying to get rid of this regime that's trying to be the continuation of his father's military regime on behalf of French interests? So Macron goes to Chad and he says, now nobody is going to destabilize Chad. I said, wait, isn't the president of Chad supposed to be saying that? But then I realized, wait a minute, he is in effect the president of Chad. And these are the kind of conversation we can have. And then we can produce, people like, bites. We can produce a series of short, clips, 3 to 5 minutes. And, if people like to consume information in this whole viral era that way, let's serve it to them that way.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
Then, so I probably have a very not so optimistic view of the media, social media. And if you think about it, some of us have gotten really comfortable with social media and the ease of it. You go on Twitter, you go on YouTube, you go on this site, you post something and you reach people. If we think about it, though, in comparison to past times where you actually had a newspaper that you were printing and, people had it in their hands and stuff like that, it's very easy at this particular point for the imperialist structure to shut us down. And this is something that I think, all of us are aware of. It's something that I'm sure makes all of us uncomfortable. And I think that more and more African people, we have to take note of some of the moves they've been making, because I honestly think they've been testing the waters a lot with some of our activists, some of our organizations. And I think that the solution is that we have to, and I know many on this panel and many already are doing this, but we have to make sure when it comes to preaching to the choir that we're not just putting out information separate from an organizational structure. And I see our comrades from Columnist in the chat. I think that's something that they really showed us well, is that if you're not connected to organizations on the ground and the structure decides that they just want to silence you, if you do not have other outlets, then you are going to be screwed. And this is something I take very seriously at this particular point. I've been pushing on my channel more and more, to try to say, okay, like, I believe there's going to be a day they're going to push that button on me. I do. At least if African people revolt internationally, and I believe in my heart that we will, there's going to be a day where all of these sites is just going to be under siege.
Yes.
So I think we have to, actively grow our platforms, but actively know that day's coming. And if we're not ready, it's going to be a lot more difficult for us to actually be engaged with the movement, because we don't have, individuals who are going to deliver our papers to Miss So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so. We don't have that as much as we used to. And so I think that's really something that we have to actively plan for while we're continuing to grow our platforms. That's, to me, the only way we're going to be able to sustain ourselves.
Can I add something to what Sister Tierney just said?
Yeah, if it could be real quick, because we
Yes, absolutely. But she's point on. And that goes back to us building our own platforms and trying to get the conscious young sisters and brothers who are very tech savvy as well, with the thought that we need to have our own way of being able to independently, whether it's our own version of a Twitter, our own version of a Facebook, or what have you. But since so many people are now engaged in the social media space, we have to find a way to make it work to our advantage. And I agree with Margaret totally. I have noticed that a trend in my own case, when my Twitter followers go up by about 10 to 15, it freezes, and then it starts going down to about another 10, and then it starts going up again. And I go and I look at it, I said, wait, but nobody's telling me that they're deleting me. So why is the number always consistently stuck on a certain range? And then whenever I tweet, and then I also tag Twitter customer service or Twitter something. And then when I say that, oh, my numbers are playing funny games again. And then it stops. And then it keeps growing for a while. And then after a while, they go back to the same pattern again. So it's not paranoia at all. I agree with you 100% because it happens consistently to me as well.
I got some more questions, but I won't disrespect the process of the time. There's a lot of questions in the Q&A. I want to I might need some help getting through all of these or trying to, so the very first one, is that the first one? Yes. For those of you primarily on YouTube, I think we kind of touched on, how are you hedging your risks? What are your measures to protect yourself from arbitrary actions against all? We kind of, well, it's more, you didn't really touch on that, but let me read you through a few of these and then there's that one. Keep it in mind what your answer is going to be for that. What is the biggest challenge in trying to unite our people through the power of media? Maybe that's connected to the other one. And then the last one, for now, this batch, we need a stronger revolutionary Pan-African media. What are some ideas your guests have on achieving this? So it's the what are you doing to protect yourselves, the risk from arbitrary actions on social media, on YouTube? What's the biggest challenge? Getting our people, uniting our people. And then what are some of your, your ideas on, strong revolutionary Pan-African media? Tierney, so I want to call on people just to
okay. I want to answer two. One, as far as YouTube. And I don't know if this necessarily does anything, but I try my best not to catch the attention of YouTube. I've made a decision, and it might be costing me, but I'm not going to monetize my videos, because I've noticed that when I do, I get a certain amount of scrutiny that I get a certain amount of surveillance, I would say. That's a decision I made early on. And in addition, I know that I have to actively push and tell people, listen, please, I'm telling you, they're going to remove this channel if it's successful. And success to me is African people revolting against the system. So if you do want to get this information, please do go to this platform. I just started that recently because I've just been noticing a lot of censorship, and it's like something's always been in the back of my head. All the white man got to do is say, I'm done allowing this, and I lose, all the work that I've put out for all this time. So I'm just gonna, ignore it and be uncomfortable. Then I said, no, let's deal with it. Let's just try to encourage people. It's difficult for some of our people. Some of our people love ease, but I'm confident that, if we keep pushing that message and making it essential to, our message, that people will understand that. The other one, though, as far as the Pan-African media, I am of the opinion that certain things happening from places like the United States are not going to have the same fervor that it did in the past. I'm of the opinion that when you look at the masses of people who are suffering the worst, they tend to be in countries inside of the continent of Africa, or in a country like Haiti. And I'm of the belief that the next movement is going to have to come from the continent of Africa, and that rather than us sparking, us in the diaspora sparking the movement, that we're going to see the continent that has a huge booming youthful population. I believe they're going to be the ones to really spark that next movement. And so I would say that a Pan-Africanist media is going to be with those who are the most disenfranchised in the continent, finding means to organize collectively with the diaspora as a support, as opposed to the opposite. That's my opinion.
I agree with that assessment totally. And it's always been like that, actually. The disenfranchised people in Africa, and that, of course, now is the youth, the vast majority, the rural farmers that are still like a substantial part of the population, students, and some of the workers. There's a very good commentary by Walter Rodney, Crisis in the Periphery, Africa and the Caribbean. It's about an hour long. It's on YouTube. It's just brilliant, the way he assesses the situation. He says exactly what Sister Turner just said, that at the end of the day, it's not really about us And he says, and that includes himself, Walter Rodney. Whether he liked it or not, he's part of the bourgeoisie, or the petit bourgeois. So what we need to do is not to say, what can we do for the people, but how can we empower them to do for themselves? So for example, there was not, at the time he made this speech, I think it was probably 1980, around the same year he was killed, or maybe 1979. And I think it was at Harvard. And he said, you know, what is missing are parties that represent the interest of the non-elite in African countries, because the elite are basically the biggest enemies in Africa. Well, he didn't really use that word, but that's essentially what he was saying. Because as we know, they work in cahoots with the IMF and the World Bank, so that the interests of the IMF and the World Bank are also the interest of the ruling class in African countries. So at the end of the day, they are the ones that need to be removed, because they've allowed the continuation of colonialism in Africa in another form. One of my favorite titles or book is Not Yet Uhuru by Oginga Odinga, the father of Raila Odinga, who was a committed Pan-African, a committed socialist. After Kenya won independence, he said, now let's realize the dreams for why the people went to the forest to fight the British, which was to restore the land to the African, take control of the industries, right? But the British shook hands with Jomo Kenyatta and shut the door on Odinga, and shut the door of all those fighters who actually fought and liberated Kenya. They're all forgotten. It's only in recent years that they started building statues for them. So those are the people that need to be empowered in Africa. If you look at it carefully, when we say African countries want independence, it's meaningless.
There's no such try to get some other questions in here before we run out of time, bro. And one of them is specifically for you. So if we maybe want to, I hate cutting it off for anybody else, but I don't want to. So I'm going to read them in batches of 3, because we got like 3 more minutes for this. So what texts were foundational for you all in your journey to educate and liberate yourselves? I'm a 21-year-old anthropology student. If I had to name one, with Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I'm interested in the educate. Anyway, that's the question. What was the text or and then I have a new podcast I'm trying to get off the question. Person has a new podcast, is hosting lectures. How can we establish a speakers bureau that makes it easier for those like myself to invite activists, speakers, authors onto my podcast? That's the other question. This question is for Milton directly. I have a question to Milton about his position on Tigray, echoing Samantha Powers in the State Department. Isn't that an issue of credibility when Black leftists side with Washington-backed TPLF?
All right. So in terms of being critical of the war does not mean you're siding with the warmongers at all. I think the problem in Ethiopia is that there's now a great imbalance. When you have a conflict, when the parties involved, there's a possibility for mediation. There's a possibility for outside actors, even in Africa, to become involved and resolve the issue. But I think the biggest mistake was for the Ethiopian Prime Minister to invite Eritrea to join in the conflict, because Eritrea has its own issues with Tigray. When Ethiopia and Eritrea fought 2 or 3 serious wars years ago, and Eritrea was defeated, most of the fighters were from Tigray. So now, decades later, Eritrea is actually there seeking revenge. So they're very different agendas.
Well, hold on. I think the question is more about the talking points, because right now it could be said that what you're saying are the talking points of the State Department instead of, and so that is the question.
No, that's nonsense. How can a Pan-African get his talking points from the State Department? That doesn't make sense. If that is the question, there's nowhere have I repeated any talking points from the State Department. In fact, my talking points come from Ethiopians who actually used to be in the military in Ethiopia and are very familiar with the situation on the ground. I did not myself even know the distinction between the federal government's agenda in Tigray in trying to hold the nation together, as opposed to Eritrea's different agenda in Tigray. The State Department didn't say that.
Okay, well, I guess the same person is asking also about the NATO and the responsibility to protect the supports TP. I think this one is a little bit more than we can handle on this.
Oh, no, but let me say something on that. I've never used that.
Can it be real quick, because we got the other questions and then the other.
I just answered it. I've never used that term. So I think the person is actually attributing words
which term?
Which I never used. So it's not true.
Which term? I'm sorry.
And let me repeat this one more time. By opposing the war, just because the State Department also opposes
responsibility
for its own agenda, does not mean we're on the same page. That doesn't make sense. There are millions of Africans who oppose the war in Tigray.
Okay. So the other, do I need to read the other questions over again for people? Maybe I should read mine. And then I'm gonna have to. So the other one, what texts were foundational for you in your journey to educate and liberate yourselves, and then what? Where is the other one? Oh, did I accidentally? I may have. That was one, and there was something about podcasts. So maybe somebody else, if you can, to diversify the input.
Yeah, I answered that person actually. Somebody asked about podcasts. Just ask people. You never know who's going to say yes. I try to say yes. Sometimes their podcast is just getting started. They have no listeners, but if I can, I will say yes. I think that's important for us, by the way, to do that as much as possible and be supportive of people who are making these efforts. So don't assume you can't get in touch with someone. For me, it's my schedule more than anything, but ask away.
You want to also answer the one about foundational readings while you're on?
My foundational readings started with Jet and Ebony, which used to be much better than they are now. I found out, and my family, we always had there were always Negroes, great Negroes of the past or something like that. And those are things you might be able to sneer at, but just to know that we have a history worth knowing about, I think was essential to me. But now my foundational listening and reading is everybody sitting here. For real.
Good. The rest of you all, should I call on people? Tierney, you want to go?
Actually, Dr. Ball had his hand raised a while back.
Oh, okay.
I wonder what he was going to say.
Appreciate it. First, before I forget, I just want to say that I'm deeply impressed by, if I'm pronouncing her name right, Levita and Billy. I think they are the flyest ASL interpreters I've ever seen. I think it's
yes, I echo that sentiment.
It's
keeping it going
crazy.
too.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
Thank you.
As a foundational text, I can't, it's hard to pick one. I'll just pick George Jackson's Blood in My Eye, because he makes a particular analysis of media and journalism and its relationship as sort of a three-pronged approach with the secret army and the alternative political party, as I think appropriately to understand how it's supposed to be used and in what context media and journalism are used. I just want to say that I think one of the biggest problems that we have, that I've noticed, is not the absence or lack necessarily of media or podcasts or journalism. It's the lack of organization of our work and our collaboration and our cross-pollination and our cross-referencing and our cross-distribution of resources. And I don't have a solution other than, what we keep trying to do, but that I think a lot of us here are trying to do. But I just wanted to point that out, that I think we all have to do more of that than trying to simply start yet another. We should be looking to support and work with something that maybe already exists, that is doing something similar, to magnify not only its already existing reach, but to build on it and expand the power of that Black radical public or Pan-African radical public sphere that I think we need. And again, just by public sphere, it's just that traditional notion in media studies that we need a space where people come together and have these exact discussions, but within a certain political context. And I don't think necessarily we need to be trying to chase the largest number of audience or views, et cetera, as much as we need to capture the as much as possible the pockets of our communities that are already looking for this kind of media and need it the most, in terms of where they already are situated consciously at this point. And I agree with Eugene's point that people are hungry and want, and we don't have to worry about people not being interested. I just think that those who already know they are needs to be our first focus. Anyway, and to work more collaboratively to reach that goal. So.
Oh, thank you. Let's go through everyone so we can not overdo the interpreters and our tech people. Who's the next person? Margaret, Margaret already went. Tierney, did you go?
Eugene hasn't gone in a while.
Oh, Eugene.
Sure. I mean, in a great conversation, and I appreciate all the questions. I mean, maybe just to link a couple things together. I mean, I think sometimes when we think about the issue of censorship on the internet, I think we actually are not putting it in fully the correct context. I mean, from a technical point of view, obviously, we could build our own servers and we could build our own video platforms. And as difficult as that may sound, it's actually not as difficult as it seems, but it's very expensive, because to hold to the servers especially are extraordinarily expensive. And that's part of why it's hard to scale up. But even if you have your own server, I mean, they can still turn off the internet, denial of service attacks. I mean, there's a million different things they want to do. So if what we're really ultimately concerned about is that we don't have control over our own message, which we should be concerned about, we have to recognize that we can't resolve that problem until we seize state power and the means of production. I mean, there is no way that the Encyclopedia Africana happens in Ghana because they just raised money or whatever, but they had seized power. I think we could say that about so many different entities that we have seen over the years. I mean, we could certainly talk about Robert Williams, who we just talked about, who was only able to launch Radio Free Dixie because of state power seized by revolutionaries in Cuba and then subsequently in China. And I think historically, and I just don't want us to put ourselves in too much of a box, is all I'm saying, where we're constantly having a conversation about how do we combat Google. I'm honestly less concerned about that in a way. I'm more concerned about how do we take over Google? How do we take over the internet superhighways? How do we turn that over to the democratic dictatorship of people to make their own history and to destroy the exploiters and to suppress them, so we're not even worried about their control over the newspapers or over the media? And I think that's ultimately our task. And we're going to struggle to get our word out until then, because they have the power and they will do everything possible to disrupt it. If you read the Seize the Time by Bobby Seale, there's an amazing passage in there about the Black Panther newspaper, and they were selling hundreds of thousands of newspapers every week, and everything that was done to just destroy the newspaper in transit, and the amazing links they went to make sure that it happened. So just remembering, I think, our ultimate goal in terms of that piece, foundational text. I mean, I almost feel like every book I read is foundational. I mean, knowledge is so powerful. One that just caught my eye when I looked to my right, though, when you read the question, Netfa, is I have a bookshelf to the right, you can't see. Black Awakening in Capitalist America by Robert Allen. And that book to me is maybe more important now than it's ever been, because I feel we talk, and we should talk, consistently about COINTELPRO. But as much as we talk about the repressive apparatus, we don't talk as much about the co-optive apparatus. And I think in the context of billionaire philanthropy, nonprofits, I mean, we can see what happened with, so-called Black Lives Matter Global Network. I think there's a lot a lot to learn from Dr. Allen's book, where he deals with how the Ford Foundation came in trying to co-opt the Black Power movement and the radical Black movement. So I think that's definitely an important book and a foundational text. And one I'll just throw out there, it's also, I'm looking at it, two more, I'll just say. I'm just looking for good books.
I'm looking over there.
No. You know, Walter Rodney's, well, newly published, although it's old, you know, The Soviet Union: A View from the Third World. I don't really love the title, I'll be honest with you, because I feel like it actually pigeonholes him. I actually think it's one of the best texts ever written about the Soviet Union. I think you could teach a class on the Soviet Union from that book without almost any other changes. It's amazing how just how well read he was on every single aspect of the Russian Revolution. But I think important if we're talking about revolutions. And the final one, just randomly, Hands on the Freedom Plow, which is a collection of writings from women of SNCC. And I have to say, it's a revelation to me. I mean, the essays are about everything all over the place, but it really, I think, the way history is told about SNCC, the way the history of women in SNCC is told, is so distorted. And to have that voice unmediated speaking for themselves, I think is super powerful. And I'll just echo what Ajamu said in the chat. If you can donate to Black Alliance for Peace, please do. I mean, if we can put our dollars together, we can amplify our voice 100% with organizations we know aren't going to sell out and aren't going to do, you know, anything in favor of the imperialist agenda.
I just put the donate in the chat, the link. Was that to everybody or is that just to, okay, my bad. Somebody can put it, put the link. But Tierney, you wanna?
I mean, I guess kind of in response to that, I mean, I guess there's also a level of, for me personally, you know, I don't see honestly my future in America, and so that's kind of probably why I'm a little different in certain regards, in that I believe whenever Africa gains power, America will virtually be worthless. And because of that, I have no faith in the media as a media even controlled by us here. My honest faith is in African people gaining sovereignty, gaining independence, and being able to create those things for ourselves. And so when we're struggling towards that goal, I don't see an avenue to navigate inside of the internet that is controlled by the West. And when it is controlled by Africans, I think we'll be in a very different place. So I guess I just say, for me, liberation is going to be a lot more of Africans controlling and Africans building. And for that, we have to have an entire global revolution where the entire level of infrastructure will be turned on its head. So that's just me.
And your foundational reading, you want to throw one out?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
There's so many, honestly. I guess one that I think more of our people need to read is Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That's one of my favorites. Oh my gosh, anything written by Kwame Nkrumah, anything written by Kwame, right? Anything written by Sekou, anything written by any of those people. Yeah. Bad at naming.
Right. That's right. And Milton, the only thing you can say more is your foundational reading, because I think we
absolutely. Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism.
Yeah, anything written by, yeah.
African Origins of Civilization. That's a must read, I think, for every African person. Yes, check Acha Diop. Decolonizing the Mind by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Things Fall Apart. That was foundational for me as well, by Chinua Achebe. This has already been mentioned, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, by Rodney. Wretched of the Earth. The Autobiography of Malcolm X. I Write What I Like.
Steve.
By
That's one of Jared's too. Jared, did you say foundational one? Oh, I can't remember if you did. Okay. But anyway, everybody, we're gonna, I'm sorry I couldn't get to, we're sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions. But I think it was a very engaged and good conversation. You just participated in Voices Against Empire, discussion on Black radical media with some very serious media powerhouses, not just on the panel, but also just in the you know, amongst us right now. So I want to thank you. Let's remember to stay informed, engaged, and interconnected, and then fight for power. Oh, did we even lift up Black Power Media? So we need to, anyway, there's so many media, Black Star News, Black Power Media, Black Agenda Board. There's so many Voices with Vision and WPFW and the Pacifica stations. Anyway, thank you all. Donate to Black Alliance for Peace and get organized, and let's get free.
Thank you.